Councilmember Ribur,
Here.
Vice Mayor Lainez,
Here.
and Mayor Tamirano.
Here. All right, we'll go ahead and open up public comment. Is there any public comments? All right, public comment is now closed. We have,
One
One
item on a closed session agenda, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated potential litigation, 2 matters.
we are now recessed to closed session.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, with all 5 members of the City Council being present, the City Council met in closed session, discussed one item, anticipate litigation. City staff made a presentation. City Council provided direction. No final reportable action was taken. That completes my report out of closed session. Thank you.
Okay, the public meeting will now start. Can we please have a roll call?
Councilmember Guimedo.
Here.
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Ibor. Vice Mayor Lainez.
Here.
And Mayor Altamirano.
Here. We'll go ahead and open up public comment. Is there any public comment?
Moment.
Seeing none, public comment is now closed. We'll move to scheduled matters, which we have item number 1, Commerce Cannabis Program Update.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of City Council. Mr. Zelga Dorado will do a brief presentation.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm here to present the commercial cannabis permit update. Is it on? Yep. Okay, next slide. I'm here to just provide you a brief history of the program. We begin with the adoption of Ordinance 700, which was approved by City Council September 14, 2018, and on October 5th, 2018, the ordinance took effect, which allowed commercial cannabis activities in the city. Next slide. So in October 5th through 2022, October 5th through the 22nd, in 2018, we began the intake application period, which we had 41 complete applications that were submitted. On November 13th, 2018, City Council approved the issuance of a notice of selection for 31 CCP applicants, which are commercial cannabis permit applicants. City Council approved a total of 28 development agreements from May 7th, 2019 through January 7th, 2020. Next slide. Additionally, within this time period, the citizens-initiated referendum petition number 1 took place on June 3rd, 2019. This is where the city received 22 referendum petitions for DA-approved development agreements seeking to place council's approval on the 22 DAs on a ballot. On June 15, 2019, the city clerk, as the city's election official, notified the petitioner that all 22 referendum petitions were rejected due to failure to comply with requirements of the election code. All CCP DAs remained approved. Next slide. We had the Hernandez litigation that occurred August 5th, 2019, which this created the invalidation of 22 development agreements. They essentially were null and voided. On November 18, 2021, the court ruling was issued, which nullified all 22 development agreements. Next slide. We have the citizens initiated referendum petition, which on February 27, 2020, the city received 11 citizen-sponsored referendum petitions seeking to place the council's approval on the ballot. On April 9th, 2020, county clerk deemed the 11 referendum petitions to contain sufficient signatures, and the referendum petitions was certified for April 10th, 2020, which essentially nullified and voided all 11 development agreements. Next slide. And now currently we have a snapshot of all of our operators who have executed development agreement, and we've divided them into 2 sections. Those that are non-operational, meaning those that do not have a secured business license with the city, and those that possess a business license with the city. In order to possess a business license with the city, all of them must have had completed the plan check process and received a business license, not only with the state, but with the city as well. We have, within those 2 categories, are broken down into 2 further categories. Those that are inactive, which have not moved forward with their permitting process, or just essentially stopped the process. And then we have those that are in the plan check process, which Here it appears as 3 upon confirmation. From planning, we have 2 that are ready to go to receive their business license soon. The category of operational, we have compliant and those that owe fees. In brief summary, those 3 currently are compliant with the city and have provided all of their operating and community benefit fees. Those below have not. Next slide. And just to provide you some background on in each development agreement, we have the licenses that were approved by City Council: manufacturing, distribution, testing, non-storefront retail delivery, microbusiness, and cultivation. Each of them have their own designated percentages based off of their gross receipts that they provide the city. For cultivation, it is $13 per square foot for their canopy space for the year. And we also, in the development agreement, we have operating fees, which they begin at $100,810. So fourth and fifth final year of the development agreement, each development agreement is approximately 5 years, is $127,000. So these fees, operating fees, each operator must pay the minimum per their operating year. So if they're in their first year, they're at $100,810 of operations, they have to pay the city that amount. Next slide, please. Some additional fees in the development agreement. We have non-operating fees, which are due 180 days after their effective date, which is after they sign their development agreement. It is in the development agreement that they should pay $10,250. And then we have community benefits as well, which within the first 30 days of them signing their development agreement, they owe $21,000, and in the second half, about 180 days after they receive their business license from the city, they owe the remainder of the $21,000. Following their first year of operations, they owe $52,000 through the 5th and final year of their business license. So each year they will owe $52,000. Next slide, please. So these are the license compliancy fees for the city. This is a brief for the city and also for neighboring cities as well. We have a snapshot of Long Beach, El Monte, Bellflower, Maywood, and Montebello. These are strictly just their license fees. They're broken down into 2 categories where they have our minimum operating fees and our community benefit fees, which is what some of the cities, as you see, have. And for our minimum operating fees, we took the snapshot of the second year because we see that would be like more or less the average for each operator. And as you can see, the total for the second year for the City of Commerce is $160,000. And for other cities, it ranges from $6,000 plus additional fees, $35,000 in Bellflower, $14,850 in Maywood, and $50,000 in Montebello. Next slide, please. And again, we used the same cities to compare with the City of Commerce, where we have the license fees that council has approved. And we have the City of Long Beach, $13.09 per square foot for cultivation. And as you can see kind of on the comparison chart, that the City of Commerce is in a good position where we are comparable to other cities. If not, we are lower in comparison to other cities. And this is different from what I previously mentioned, the license compliancy fees, the chart that was shared briefly before. And that's it. That's our presentation. Thank you.
So, Mayor and members of the council, given the information that was presented,
That's good. That's fine. Thank you.
no, leave that number up. Leave that slide up.
Do it.
Staff recommending several changes to our existing program in an effort to not only streamline but organize operators we have operators are in compliance, we have operators not in compliance, and so these recommendations are both to make us more competitive and also to bring forward anybody that we believe is on the cusp of compliance and having them pay their fees along with executing any related agreements or deletion of agreements if there is no compliance. So we're proposing to eliminate non-operating fees. Those fees really no other agency collects, and the City of Commerce has never collected those fees. Change the minimum operating fee schedule from a quarterly year basis to a monthly basis, and that allows these folks, it facilitates as the revenue comes in for them to pay versus having to pay a big chunk at the end of the year. And then, as you see, the recommendation for proposed fees would still be the highest in the region, but obviously we still think it would be competitive based on the fact that our operating fees are at or below market. Part of what we'd like to do is have conversations with these folks to bring them to compliance and offer payment plans, and so we are recommending that we are provided with flexibility to enter into such agreements that we bring back to the City Council individually, but as a general directive to make sure that City Council, one, understands, and two, approves of the city seeking compliance through payment plans. I can answer any questions, or staff can answer questions related to the presentations tonight.
Is there any questions or comments right now? Go ahead, Councilman.
Just for clarification, where it states community benefits fee will be on date of execution, that means on the date they start operating or the day?
The date that they sign their development agreement.
Oh, on that day, that fee will be, they're gonna have to pay it, and then after that, it'll be done on a yearly basis?
So yes, after that,
Okay.
it will be done. Upon receiving their business license, it would be done
Every
on a
year.
yearly- Yes, every year.
And how is it implemented right now?
Right now, so once they execute their development agreement, 30 days after that, the city invoices the operator
Oh, got it.
21,000, and then there's this gap.
So this is saying, we're not gonna wait, you pay it then, and then from there, okay, that sounds good. Okay, thank you.
And to be clear, the proposed changes we recommend to implement as soon as possible, but it would only apply to anybody that's compliant right now. So anybody that's not compliant, none of this applies to them. They would have to become compliant, make up for the years they were non-compliant, and then they would be able to take benefit of the new program.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar to the Councilwoman's question, could we talk about the payment plan? So obviously, what we're recommending is that the benefits fee be paid upon execution of the agreement, unless otherwise placed on a payment plan as recommended by the city manager. So can we talk about procedurally what that would look like?
So the payment plan really is intended to, although the folks are not compliant, to bring them to compliance. So it's not necessarily on the proposed fees moving forward. Those are going to be due as we present. It's really for those folks, and it's hard to say because some folks are been non-compliant for a year, some for longer than that, and so it really becomes a negotiation. But we're not proposing to waive fees or discount fees. They have to pay what was owed to the city. It's just a matter of how, we can capture those. As a model, for example, we're using a 2-year window, right? You have 2 years to catch up, and what that looks like, we can discuss, right? Whether it's quarterly, monthly, annually, whatever that works, but essentially, it would be individual. These are individual development agreements, correct? And so we would have individual amendments to these agreements that would allow us to bring forward a payment plan that ultimately the city council would have to approve.
Okay, and I think that's where I was going with this. So 2 things. One, the payment plan would only be presented as an option for those that have been delinquent, right? And that owe money in arrears, right? So we're not talking about any future community benefits fees moving forward, and it would require council action, right?
It would.
We want to make that decision? Okay.
It would.
That answers my question.
What we're simply doing tonight is we're seeking direction on a path to move forward so that we can approach all these folks and give them a path for compliance. Because it ultimately could be that they either A, refuse or cannot be compliant, and then we will bring forward the related actions to the city council for that also. Essentially, this program has been in place for more than a handful of years now. And I think from the administration perspective, we need to really regulate how we're implementing this program. And this is a major step in that area. So what we're trying to do is be clear about what the rules are, make sure the city council understands the rules, and give people the path to compliance. Ultimately, when the city council went down this venture, it was to bring in revenue so that we can provide all the services the city provides. The city, as you know, especially as compared to our neighbors, provides, I think, services second to none, and this allows us to continue to do that. So it's part of that.
Any other questions or comments?
City Manager, in the presentation, you have those that are compliant and those that are non-compliant, correct?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me that none of them have paid the fee that they agreed to pay, which is for the, what was it, non-operational? Is that right?
Those are some of the fees. There's a variety of fees that they haven't paid. We are not proposing to waive any of those fees. If they want to become compliant, they have to pay all their fees to become current.
Yeah, no, the concern that I have is that they've been non-compliant for years. You know, they haven't
correct.
been paying these fees, and we just haven't enforced the agreements that they signed onto with the city. And so that, to me, is problematic. And I've indicated that already, and I'm being redundant here and telling you that. So I just don't feel comfortable us moving forward. I believe that some of these individuals that aren't, obviously, they have legal legal binding documents that they signed on to, and they're still not paying it. They didn't pay it. And, you know, so why are we thinking that all of a sudden this is going to change?
You're absolutely correct, and I'm not sure it will change. And if it doesn't, that's where you'll see recommendations related to that. But you're correct. They've been out of compliance and for years in some cases.
May I add some to that? Some of the operators have been non-compliant for a period of time. Others are more recent non-compliance, where they were compliant and more recently fell out of compliance. So there are degrees, a difference in the term non-compliance. And so the idea is, if we change some elements of the program, the ones that are closer to compliance may be able to get into compliance, stay into compliance, and it may motivate others that never were in compliance to get into compliance, but we'll see. But again, not everybody has the same history of non-compliance.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that additional information.
Okay, so at this time, what would you need from us?
So we're recommending, and Giselle can kind of itemize it. Why don't we do that? Let's itemize what staff's recommending and go from there. As far as if the council is okay with those recommendations or wants to amend any of the recommended items.
Okay, and if we're
And just to be
okay-
clear, tonight, the council's not taking action. None of this is the final action. This is just receiving direction from the city council for potentially bringing future items to the city council for its consideration.
Okay.
So it's just a receive and file?
Okay.
Just
Itemize the recommendations.
Okay, the recommended for the changes of existing development agreement would be to reduce the rate of the community benefits to $32,000 on a flat rate basis, and for minimum operating fees at a flat rate basis, $50,000 on a yearly basis, $82,000 for each operator. Second would be to eliminate non-operating fees for each development agreement. Third, to change the minimum operating fee payment schedule for a quarterly or yearly basis to a monthly basis. Fourth, community benefits will be owed on the date of execution unless otherwise placed on a payment plan, as recommended by the city manager. Every year thereafter, the fee will be paid on a yearly basis and will be owed at the beginning of each fiscal year.
So if the city council is okay with those recommendations, we'll move forward to do the appropriate changes to any related resolutions and obviously conversations we have with the operators.
Anybody opposed of these recommendations?
I'm not, so you can put me as a no for that. Thank you.
I abstain.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so then we're going to move on to item number 2, which is a presentation regarding digital billboards.
Yes, Mayor, this is a follow-up to request from City Council to have a study session related to billboard revenues and the allocation of those revenues on top. So tonight you'll hear a summary of where we were, and we can have a conversation from there. Staff can answer questions.
Good evening, Mayor Altamirano, Vice Mayor Lainez, members of the City Council. I'm Jessica Serrano, your Community Development Director, and I'm here to introduce once again Scott Sheldon from Terra Realty Advisors. He will continue the conversation with you from the presentation he had presented to you last on August 12th, 2025. At this point, I'll go ahead and hand off the presentation to Scott.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Mr. City Manager. My name is Scott Sheldon with Terra Realty Advisors. We had the pleasure of talking with you about 3 weeks ago, and this is a follow-up to some of the questions and some of the other direction that we received in terms of the potential for billboard signs. So again, as a summary, on August 12th, we talked a little bit about the purpose of our engagement in terms of what we've done, key findings, potential locations that the city might explore on properties that are owned by the city, as well as taking all of that and amending the zoning code to give the council flexibility in terms of looking at these opportunities for revenue, branding, and other purposes, community benefits. So the purpose of doing all of this is to basically bring more structure and more accountability and more involvement with the council and the city in terms of the signs that are there, as well as technology. The draft ordinance that we recommend will address those kinds of things, again, through a development agreement process, which gives the council lots of flexibility. We want to make sure that these things, if the council does move forward, they're strategically placed, that they generate the best amount of revenue, the most amount of revenue to the city, and that they promote local businesses through advertising and also branding for the city. So our key findings is that currently the zoning regulations do not allow billboards. There are quite a few out there. Most of them have been done through probably building permits. There are some on city properties that were actually through a lease agreement. But again, the goal would be to create means and methods for the council to be able to look at these on an individual basis and to determine whether this is something that they would like to do at a location or not, and then what's the economic value of it to the city. So right now there are about 42 billboards, with 3 of those being digital. The 3 digitals are the ones that are located on the Citadel property. There are 7 billboards on city-owned property. We've identified and mapped those. And, in terms of the locations, the primary locations are going to be obviously Interstate 5 and 710. But there are also surface streets, Washington Boulevard, Atlantic, to name 2 of them, where there are lots of static signs that might have a potential to be digitized. So again, this is a map that we looked at before. It basically grids out the city and shows the different locations, most of which are along the 5. you do have some signs that are along the 710. And then the typical cast of characters for the sign companies are all the same. There's about 7 to 8 sign companies in Southern California, actually basically in all of California, that really do signs, and especially that do digital signs. So on the city-owned properties, we've got these locations are identified, and again, subject to direction from the council in terms of what they would like to do in terms of these. These are things that we would like to explore. And again, how revenues are created in this business are basically a function of the traffic flow and the quality of the traffic. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of traffic on Interstate 5, and it is inversely converse to what we want to be in most of the time. There's just a lot of people on it, and so therefore the quality of signs is very good, which is why there's so many signs that are there. It also lends itself very well for digital signs. The digital signs are turn on an 8-second click or turn. So every one of these signs that are digital, they have an 8-second ad, and then they immediately switch to another ad. So you get eight messages per minute, and that's about 4.4 million messages per year per face. So again, that's where the revenue potential is in terms of how those are advertised, how they're sold and marketed. So then drilling down, we've looked again at identified a couple of different locations that might be something to look at in terms of being able to place a sign there. That would be on city property. Those would be done if the council chose to do that through a lease agreement. And so these are some things that we'd like to look at with direction from the council. And then the next one. Thank you. So this is just, again, along the 5 and showing the signs and the zoning and the different things with that. There's lots of constraints on signs with Caltrans also. The city can approve different things, but they still have to meet Caltrans regulations. So again, drilling down in terms of site number 7, what you're seeing on here, and again, different options to look at. And we think that they're worth exploring, again, if the council wants to go in this direction. So again, some pictures of existing signs, locations, again, on city property. Next. And again, the same thing as site 7 for a cross-reference point. Okay. So if the council is so chosen to do this, what would need to occur is a change in the zoning ordinance that would allow for digital off-site signs. Again, that would be done through a development agreement process, which is completely at the discretion of the council. We would also encourage the conversion to the extent possible of the existing static signs to either take them down or to convert them. Again, we would do that through DAs, lease agreements, licenses, lots of different ways of being able to accomplish that. And again, the idea to establish better visibility on the 5 and the 710 in terms of the static signs, reduce that clutter, support the removal of outdated signs, and again, do that through that development process. In terms of what would be required of the sign companies, very standard. We would include in any development or lease agreement PSAs or public service announcements. That would be for the benefit of the city to announce different events, different things that are going on in the city. They would have automatic lighting controls based on the industry standard, which is 0.3-foot candles over ambient light. So there's not a lot of glare on these. This is all LED technology and all basically louvered to aim at the area that the sign wants to aim at, which in this case is the freeway. We would put in and have put in where if 10% of the sign is non-functioning, the entire sign has to go dark. That's an economic consideration for the sign operator to fix the sign and not make it look not good. We'd also put in different advertising restrictions that we have on the sign companies. That's completely at the discretion of the council. Caltrans does have basically what's called the morals code in terms of you can't advertise certain things, but the cities and our city clients and school district clients, we always add different things in there that are important to the city. The other thing is for branding. We really think it's important to have branding recognition. It's an opportunity for somebody else to provide branding for the city. So we like to do that either through the design of the sign, through signs that show that you're in the City of Commerce, and there's different ways that you can do that. So that's the artistic part of that endeavor. So next steps, again, subject to the council's direction, is to finalize a zoning ordinance change that would allow this, to schedule the appropriate public hearings, and to adopt an ordinance that would effectively put the sign companies and have them be able to come in and propose to the city at the complete discretion of the city council, and to negotiate agreements for either new or converted signs. So available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mayor and members of City Council. So the City Council asked for this as a follow-up to the recommendation. I can tell you that at some point when the City Council approves the proposed zoning ordinance and all of it's fully implemented and approved, we will reach out to all of the folks that have billboards in the city, in addition to anybody that we've been reported as currently violating this new ordinance, because there's off-site advertising that they shouldn't be allowed to do. So I did want to make that clear also, that I think some of you received complaints. We've noticed it. We've issued notice of violations to some folks, but certainly once this is in place, we'll be able to regulate it much easier. So I think it'd be appropriate now if the City Council has any questions, concerns. This is more of a workshop. In other words, next steps, how the program would work, and how staff would treat this process.
Okay, we had the lights right on us. If we have questions like where's this revenue going to go, can we break it down to get in front? That's another.
No, you can have that conversation tonight, and when we bring some of these for, what I wouldn't want to do is include that as part of the ordinance. That can be done by resolution, but that conversation could happen tonight, and then when these items come forward, when appropriate, we'll include a resolution for the City Council to consider based on the direction received tonight.
Okay, because I would like to see like a portion of that go into a program for the kids, the performing arts or something of that nature to really up their game. So just, I don't know what the breakdown is now, but I'd like to kind of see, of course, some go into the general fund, but also some go to our kids for programs, specialized programs. Is there any questions or comments?
Just a follow-up on my end here. Caltrans regulations that you made reference to, what exactly are those? I believe that currently you can't have, on a digital sign, you can't have live feed, video, that sort of stuff, I think. What other things, what are the regulations related to the digital signs?
So Caltrans has got a lot of regulations. They're all set out in the Outdoor Advertising Act, or the ODA. The most important ones are typically through spacing requirements. So Caltrans has a regulation that says that you cannot have a sign, two static signs, within 500 feet of each other on the same side of the freeway. The requirement for a digital sign between two digital signs is 1,000 feet. But a digital sign can be 500 feet away from a static sign on the same side of the freeway. So Caltrans classifies both sides. So you can have a digital sign exactly opposite on either side of the freeway. That's fine. But you have to be 1,000 feet away from another digital sign on the same side.
Okay.
The other overlays that they have, and again, Caltrans has what's called the landscape freeway. That is a designation that was put in place in 1965 through the Beautification Act. And what that says is that any segment of freeway that Caltrans has considered or has at one point in time sometimes landscape, that you cannot put a sign there. And there are sections of the City of Commerce in both 710 side as well as the 5 that are designated landscape freeway. Now, there's a process, and you cannot put a sign in a landscape freeway section. But there are processes that you can go through either through a declassification or a relocation and be able to do a sign going through that. But that is at the state level. There's also bonus segments of freeways, penalty segments of freeways, a lot of different rules and regulations on that, but those are the biggest ones. Again, I mentioned that there was a code that you can't do anything that's false, liable, misleading, and those kinds of things. A very general language in the ODA in terms of that, and we typically want to make that a little bit more restrictive. But those are the primary restrictions that Caltrans has.
Okay. And on the live feed, you can't have live feed on these digital signs?
I'm sorry?
Like a live feed, like I wanted to
No, it has
display-
to be an instantaneous change. So again, there, I can point out cities that have live video, and that's very distracting. Caltrans will not allow that on the highway, period. Even if and the city can make things more restrictive, you just can't make them less restrictive between the state and the city. But the industry standard, again, is 8 seconds on a click, and it is an instantaneous change. There is no pause or anything. It just boom, boom. And you can see that if you drive down. And one of the things also that's really important is the lighting. And the lighting is industry standard, and everybody's adopted this, including most Department of Transportation throughout the state and then throughout the country, of 0.3 foot candles over ambient light at 250 feet. And that would be for a standard 14 foot by 48 foot sign. So what that means is a foot candle is what you can see, basically a candle at 1 foot. That's the light that's being emitted. And again, this is all LED technology, so it is all much better, much less obtrusive than fluorescence, where most of the signs that are static signs have lights that are throwing up on it, and they're throwing out a lot of foot candles if you did a photometric study on them. But the 0.3 foot candles is, again, an industry standard. And the other thing, when you're driving down the street and you see one of these, or highway, and you see one of these, a lot of times you'll see 2 big outriggers that go out from there. And those serve 2 purposes. The first purpose is to actually take a picture of the advertisement and date stamp it, so whoever's buying that ad knows that it was up at that particular time. But the other thing is it actually is a photo cell reader, and it judges the light. So we'll automatically, obviously in the daytime, you turn the light up because your 0.3 foot candle's over ambient light, more light in the daytime, and you turn it down at night. So those are some of the restrictions. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments?
I have questions. I'll let you.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Scott, for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. One, I think we talked about a residential buffer, right? And what is, in your opinion, what would you recommend?
Well, again, we always put these into our development agreements and into the code also. The standard is, again, there's different sizes of signs, especially in the digital side of things. Right. The standard size is a 14 foot by 48 feet. But Caltrans will allow you to go up to 1,200 square feet or a 20 by 60. So the lighting standards on this, and this was all done through a study by Daniel Lewin back in the 1988 or 1998, it was a while ago. And they established lighting standards at distances. So for the residential side of things, what we would put in an ordinance change is that you have to be on a 14 by 48 foot digital sign, LED digital sign, you would need to be at least 250 feet away from any residential property or residential zone property. If it's a 20 by 60, the lighting standard is you need to be at 350 feet away from any residential. Now, one of the things that you can look at and do is it depends on the orientation of the sign and how it faces. So you could have a residential area that's directly behind a sign that has no impact. You could look at that, and we typically like to put that in because it gives staff and again, the council some flexibility that you can lower that. because again, it's the lighting impact. It's not just the relative distance.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And the reason I ask is because I think one of the sites that you had recommended, or I think that was identified, was Atlantic and Stevens Place. Am I correct in that? But there are homes around that area. I just don't know exactly how many feet, but I think that's something that we need to be conscious of.
We would look at that. We did look at that. And again, it depends on the location and how you place the sign. Again, when you look at these signs and you walk around them, I mean, they all have individual louvers. So each one of the lights has an individual louver that points at where you want it to point at, which in this case is the freeway.
Right.
So in every one of these, we require through the development agreement that they do a photometric study based on what the photometrics are for that. And then we also have in the development agreements or lease agreements that they have to go out. If the city says, hey, we've got a complaint from a neighbor, somebody's come in and said, this seems really bright, the city would have the ability to have somebody go out there and actually do a photometric study to verify that.
Okay. It may be a premature question, but how much revenue are we anticipating to generate through the digital billboards annually?
So I will give you a standard answer. It depends.
Right, of course. Maybe it makes sense. You mentioned it's been done. You've done it in Montebello, right? I think your company advised there. How much are they generating annually?
We did the Montebello signs probably close to 10 years ago, and they started out right around $80,000 a year. But I can give you a more recent on the 5. We just did a sign on the 5 in Norwalk at Carmenita, and that was $140,000 a year. We did another sign on 5 at the Doubletree, or just south of the Doubletree on Rosecrans. That was $170,000 a year. The signs that we're doing, we've got one on the 60 that we're doing at $300,000 a year. And that's where I say it depends. It depends on the quality of that sign. It depends on how many other signs are there.
It also depends on who owns the sign. So if it's a city-owned sign, obviously it's much greater revenue, right? I think the map pointed out the city-owned sites, right? So those you could expect, I think, numbers such as those. Where they're on private-owned property, I think it's a different number altogether.
And that is a very good point. I mean, it's so the sign companies can basically pay X amount of dollars for a sign, and then how many people are participating in it. That's really what it is.
Could we show the city properties back? Can we bring those slides back up?
And I've been a part of some of these negotiations. Some companies, as you can detail, they agree to monthly or annual contributions versus some give you a lump sum for the next X number of years. It really depends on the site, right? The amount of traffic they receive and the potential revenue for the sign company. I think we're going to propose that all of these are in the form of individual DAs, correct? And so these would all come to you individually as city council. And what that means, we'll have like a standard depending on certain criteria, and we could deviate from the standard up or down depending on, again, the specific location and who owns it and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and thank you. I just, I think it would be beneficial for us to really understand like how much revenue we're anticipating, right? And it doesn't have to be right on the money, right? It could be a ballpark, but I think that would be helpful for us to know. And just to let you know where I'm coming from, I think along the freeways, it does make sense, along the 5, along the 710. I'm a little less inclined to see those along surface streets, at least right now. I think it makes sense along the freeways. I don't necessarily know if it makes sense like on surface streets, at least at the moment. But it would be good to know what that revenue looks like, right? With and without.
So I want to describe to you at least the back end of all of this. We will have conversations about who to approach, how to approach. Obviously, any private owner can come to us, but you'll have the ability to kind of prioritize what the goals are going to be for the city. You can determine that along the 5 freeways are number 1 priority, and we can go from there after that, right? And it depends on, but again, these will be individual DAs, which will give you the flexibility to say, this location I am comfortable with for the following reasons, or I'm not comfortable with for the following reasons, and it's 100% your discretion.
Understood. And, we're talking about just kind of like where that revenue could go. I think that's a good idea by the mayor. One thing I did mention when you last presented, and I still stand by, is I think it should help fund residential and commercial beautification efforts. Where I think we're in an agreement with Caltrans right now where we're managing, the beautification or at least the maintenance of some of our off-ramps, right? So I think that could help fund some of that. There's also the Neighborhood Fix-It program, which I don't know if it's active right now, but I'd like to see a Fix-It program that's not tied to community development block grant funds, right? Like I think they're a sliding scale. And I say that just because, Commerce is a lower to middle class community, and a lot of those income brackets, a lot of people just do not qualify, right? And it's painful when you have to make those improvements to your home, right? So I think having a mechanism that could fund a program like that with a better income scale or no sliding scale at all would be beneficial. So
just based on what I've heard thus far, when we bring this, we'll also accompany whatever resolution that says that percentage of the revenues will go to these other funds, right? And again, as the development agreements come in, those percentages will apply to those monies that are per DA.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, it's because of our resolution, not the ordinance. It simply takes the city council to consider if the benefit, if, for example, a certain fund's balance is too high or too low, you can later on determine I want to adjust.
Sure.
So it will give you the full flexibility to do that.
Okay, sounds good. Those are my comments and questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilwoman Mireya Garcia.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm not sure if you mentioned this already, but how many are not city-owned billboards?
How many are not?
Yes,
About 40 of them.
40? And do we have a scheduled time when they turn on and off?
I'm sorry?
Do we have a scheduled time when the billboards turn on and when the time they'll be turned off?
We've done that before. If it's a light-sensitive area where there's been a shutoff at a particular time, typically they're on 24 hours a day, but that's something that the council can say, no, at this particular location, we want it to only have a certain time frame that the sign is operational. That will impact, obviously, the economics, but that is absolutely something that the council can do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I do want to remind the city council, one of the standard asks on the city's behalf will be, I don't know what the proper term is, but essentially city airtime. So we can advertise city programs and programs of public interest.
Yeah.
Is there fancy term?
PSAs. Yes, it's
Better than airtime.
And you'll typically get, what we try to get is almost the equivalent of one click or one turn. So that can amount to a lot of messages. It's typically on a space available basis, but we have language that we always put in, make sure it's equally spread throughout the day. And again, if you do the really simple math on this, it's 4.4 million messages per sign. And if you get 8% of that, that's a lot of darn signs. Messages.
And I've seen everything from advisory notes on environmental issues. I've seen, I think City Bell Gardens, they have an individual page for each council member. You see their picture there, so I'm not proposing you do that, but I've seen that. It really is what you determine that's in the interest of the public.
And we've also extended that from some cities to schools. Their back to school night or their whatever they're doing in terms of a fair or a parent teacher night or whatever. Those are the kinds of things that can be piggybacked on also. And we always encourage our clients to use all of that. You'll never will, but use as much as you can.
Thank you again for the presentation. A lot of useful information. My question, it's kind of a silly question. I'm assuming it's yes, but I just thought of it as the Vice Mayor talked about the surface streets. Is there a traffic study that comes with these proposals? Like we know freeways, right? There are multiple cars, right? But as far as surface streets, is there some type of study that shows this street is a good idea because there's X amount of cars that travel down the street? Or is it just because of the existing billboards that are already there? How do we formulate the idea of where to put them on Surface Streets?
So for the highways are pretty simple. I mean, there's a lot of signs that are in commerce right now along both the 5 and the 710. So a lot of those signs are going to be either conversions or maybe there's some takedowns that go along with all that. Again, you're balancing out economics with aesthetics, with all the other things that you want to accomplish. So for the surface street signs, and we're doing this for 6 different cities, it is no new signs. It is only conversion of existing signs. And again, is it always appropriate? No. But in many cases it is, and there are, the surface street signs that most cities have, and I'm sure Commerce is the same, is that there's no revenue. Those are there, they were done through building permits, and so there's no real expiration date on when those things can go, and a lot of them don't look all that great. So what we're encouraging at least to look at is to digitize those signs. So the highway signs are 14 by 48. The surface street signs are 12 by 25. That's a poster sign size. And we've done that. Montebello has done that. Bell, getting ready to do in Bell Gardens, Norwalk, Pico. So a bunch of different cities, we've got these things. And again, it is a conversion of existing, no new sign. Just try to figure out a way to make what's there better and get money out of it.
Was there a slide that showed the number of signs on surface streets?
No. No.
Do we have a number?
No. I mean, I've driven up and down, and I could probably give you an order of magnitude.
Can you
but
get that to us?
That would be all it would be, is an order of magnitude. But what we'd want to do is usually through the building department, through the permits that have been issued, or you just drive up and down Washington and Atlantic.
Okay,
and
we can get
Bandini.
the exact number of billboards that we have on surface streets. I don't know who that would be and how many are on throughs, just so that we have numbers. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Mayor Proto, to your point on, we want to get an average of what each billboard's going to bring. And is there any way to, let's just say if we take a look at the 5 freeway and we identify the areas where we would like to have a digital billboard, can we kind of put an average number on it? And that way we kind of look at the areas we would like to put, even, I know you said not, no surface streets, but maybe some major streets if there's going to be large revenue coming, like Washington Boulevard.
If I may recommend, what we can do is give you an estimated number and how many city-owned sites we have, and an estimated number and how many non-city-owned sites we have, and then, because again, you will have the ability to determine, I want to do, if there's 30 non-city-owned, I'm only willing to do 10. So you have a number in your head, right? We give you the average for every single one based on, I think, just a handful of cities in our region, right? And then we could do simple math from there, right? I mean, the ones I know we have 100% control of are the city-owned ones, right?
I understand. And who's going to negotiate? Say if we put one on Washington Boulevard and we're working with Clearwater or whoever, who's going to negotiate with them?
Well, if we're continuing to work with you, that's what we do.
Okay.
And to follow up on that, we track this in Northern and Southern California because we work for 25 different cities and on sign stuff. So we track all these things. So we know what everybody is getting. And so we've got that, and happy to share that with staff in terms of what the signs are, what they're making. And again, there's a lot of different variations to it. We do signs, and depending on the sign company, some of them we like to do percentage rent deals with. So there's a MAG, which is a minimum annual guarantee, and then there versus a percentage rent. Some sign companies not so excited about doing those with, but some we are. And so there's 7, 8 sign companies, we know them all. And it depends on, the value of the traffic and the visibility and the number of other signs that are competing for messages. So those are the things that influence economics, but we can share all the stuff in this whole region of where signs are and what the deals are.
Absolutely, yeah, because I would like maybe a bigger map too, where I can actually see where they're at. Because I see like the dots and a satellite map, and I'm just having So kind of identifying exactly where they're at.
We'll give you addresses and more detailed maps.
Okay.
Certainly.
And then you mentioned that there's 3 at the Citadel?
Is what?
You mentioned there's 3 at the Citadel?
There are 3 digital signs at the Citadel with state permits.
But they're not paying, I mean, right now, we're not in,
So right now, we don't have an ordinance, so they
Okay.
couldn't pay if we wanted to. But they also are not allowed to do outside advertising. So it's a.
and that's like
conundrum.
prime property, right? I mean, that's,
Well, they are
I'll
doing
let you
offsite
guys come up with a
advertising.
number on that.
Now,
So
well,
I think would help, well, actually, I think let me wait till after the rest of the city council makes their comments, and then what I would like to do is just summarize what the next steps are, because to your point, that's really on the back end of all of this, but
Okay.
But
All right.
certainly
Any other
something.
comments or?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. You made reference to the takedowns. I believe our current ordinance, if you're going to convert an existing sign to a digital sign, I think it requires that you remove one or something like that, I forget. Is that right, or?
yeah, we've done where there's been takedown of other signs. Again, it impacts the economics of what the sign company can pay for the digital sign, but that is something that, yes, is done and can be done.
And you mentioned other cities that basically are looking to basically work with what they have. So you're going to convert and you're going to not increase the number of signs, but actually work with what you have. Would we be doing that?
I'm sorry, what?
Would we be doing that?
Yeah,
Are
we'd be looking at doing conversions, because again, when you look at the map, and there is a map in our report that drills down, and it gives much better perspective than the 10,000-foot view that you're looking at in terms of what we showed. But because of the spacing, because we actually did spacing analysis on every sign, and some of them are within 500 feet of each other, but they were old signs and Caltrans wasn't enforcing, and there's a lot of these guys put bootleg signs in also. So, funny thing. So, but in terms of looking at, a strategy for the city is to look at where are the most ideal locations where we think we can get the most money. And then what does that mean in terms of, is it an existing sign that needs to be converted? Is it a new location? It's really just, it's trying to get a feel, and really what the council would like to hear also. That's the direction.
So what we'll have is an action plan, essentially, the city council will be asked to approve. And that will give you your priorities, let's call it. Because I think Councilmember Miller was talking about basically saturation, right? There's a such thing. If you put too many, the value goes down quite a bit. In fact, some of these folks will specifically ask under DAs for more length than even what's required. You can't have one, over here or whatever, that kind of thing. So, but we'll have an action plan that you will consider and give us direction, essentially, on how to move forward. And then we do get into the negotiations with these individuals, because again, I worked, I think the last agreement, they just, instead of having it annually, they gave us a big chunk of money up front and said, we're good for the next X number of years. Okay.
All right. Okay. All right. Would you like to?
Yep. I think we're good. So if, Jessica, can you just talk very specifically what the next steps are? And again, a lot of what we talked about today is really on the back end of everything she's going to detail. We essentially have to create the rule so that we can enforce the rule.
Next slide. So at this point, given the direction that we're getting from council, we can finalize the draft ordinance, and the next step would be schedule the planning commission public hearing for the ordinance itself. So given a lot of the direction we're getting from you tonight, we can incorporate those changes into the draft ordinance and present it to planning commission. They're only a recommending body, so they'll review it and make any recommendations to city council. And then after that, the public hearings, there will be a public hearing before the city council, and then you will all have an opportunity to dig deeper into the weeds of the actual ordinance. And then from there, we could coordinate with the city, or our consultant can coordinate with the city on an RFP for potential billboard sites on city-owned properties. And so that would be the next step.
Yeah, and that's where essentially the action plan will come into play. Here's what we want to do. You bless it, you make us change it, and then we essentially enter the next 2 steps.
And then from there, we can negotiate development agreements with each billboard operator. And it'll be based on terms that the city council can tailor based on each location.
Okay. All righty. So I think we have one more
Yeah,
question.
just a quick question. In the case where you have, let's say, multiple signs that are, don't meet the requirements of distance, how do you determine if they're not owned by the same operator? Which one's got to go? How do you come to that conclusion? How do you address that? Because I believe we may have some of those cases out there, right?
So if the sign's there and it's legal non-conforming, even without the spacing requirement at Caltrans, the only way to get rid of them is through a negotiation typically, or you can condemn them, and that's an expensive process. So the negotiation would be depending on who the sign operator is, and again, we've identified every one of the sign operators, strategically, where's the best location that's going to be the best value for the city? And the best value is a combination of money, it's a combination of, can I take some signs down, can I convert some signs? What does that whole bundle look like? And so it's more a holistic thing that we typically look at and how we try to drive that, again, based on the needs and desires of the council.
All right, thank you, Scott. So once you do that analysis, you'll be able to provide us with some actual information and saying, hey, we recommend this, this has a high value, we think this would be a great location, but we have this problem.
Yes.
And then at that point, we can address that.
Now on city-owned property, if the city chose to go and take a look at some of those, what we would recommend is actually going out on an RFP process or request for proposal. You get different people that maybe not have a sign that want a sign. And again, it depends on who it is, but we've done lots and lots of those too.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
This is a receiving file item, Mayor.
Okay, so we're going to receive and file, then we're going to adjourn this meeting. Howard, we're going to go back into closed session, right?
No.
We're not?
We're concluded.
Okay. All right, perfect. So then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.